little bit. Welcome to another edition of the Honest Hour. Some of you may recognize the background music as being from Puccini's great opera, one of many great operas, Madame Butterfly, which is, I think, a good choice of music for the topic of the day. We're going to continue along the same vein as we did last episode and focus in on a story that involves two souls that are quite well known and have a very, very well studied relationship, which I think makes this a good case study to illustrate what I've been talking about, how the game of souls works through reincarnation and karma and the anointment of souls of other souls. Okay, so picture in the background is a classic picture of, I like it, Joan of Arc and the Archangel Mikhael coming and speaking to her. Some of the interesting pieces of this are that as per the art of the time, she was depicted as a very homely, humble peasant girl, not much going for her, very, very modestly attired, not a lot of strength of character in her face, just an average, everyday, downtrodden French peasant. The Archangel Mikhael, unlike the picture we used for the background last time, is depicted as, in general, less warlike. He's carrying a sword and he's like whispering in her ear, and is otherwise attired in very subdued colors that sort of these pastel kind of colors, and the general look of him conveys a sort of very feminine version of the archangel that is described in the Bible as being, quite a masculine sort of character, very assertive, very warlike, very strong character. So interesting depiction. I actually ended up duplicating it and putting them back to back because I originally, because it was the wrong scale, the wrong dimensions to fit on the screen behind me. But then when I did it, I thought, this actually works nicely because you've got two versions of this archangel pointing to something in the middle. And I think you're going to see how this fits into this whole scheme of the multiverse as I get into it. Okay, so I'm going to title this one Joan of Arc and Saint Michael, the pattern of sainthood through anointment and Merkaba development. Now, we haven't talked about Merkabas for a while, so I'm going to do a little review, a little refresher. Bear with me. If you've already heard this, you might learn something from hearing it a different way. Every time I teach this, something a little bit new comes out. Okay, so what is a Merkaba? This is something that our species has been struggling with spiritually pretty much as long as we've had any history. The idea is that people have noticed that there are levels of consciousness, of spiritual consciousness, that you can be very, very intelligent, very, very successful, and have very little spiritual consciousness. That would prevent you from making huge karmic mistakes, taking advantage of others, abusing others, overextending yourself, and then facing a colossal failure. And that happens both individually and in larger soul groupings whole civilizations, tribes, chosen people, chosen species can be anointed and then fall into corruption. This is a common theme throughout certainly the Bible and all other spiritual writings that we have inherited in various cultures. So one of the key differences and problems of this is different cultures, different religions have a different idea of what the levels of, what the dimensions of spiritual development are. And this corresponds to like a number of levels that you have, okay? One of the occult depictions, which was very popular, is a pentagram description, where the levels of spirituality involve what you do with your feet, what you do with your hands, and what you do with your brain to orchestrate the whole thing. And the rest of the body was kind of just considered something that was going to get in the way of doing the right thing with your feet and hands and brain, which is a fairly good way of thinking about physical existence. Doesn't really have a very much of a spiritual dimension. The spiritual dimension is all represented by what's going on with the brain, because the brain controls the hands and the feet for the most part. Okay, and this is a pentagram system. It conceives of 5 levels. Okay, another popular depiction is this kind of Merkaba. The Star of David, in fact, is a 2-dimensional representation of this tetrahedron style Merkaba, where you have 2 tetrahedrons, a 4-sided pyramid that are interlocked and thus come to embody a human spirit. One of the shortcomings of this view is that it presumes this perfect symmetry. This is a perfected depiction. And as we know, souls aren't created perfect. If they were, there would have been no need for any further creation or evolution of everything. If everything was created perfect, why mess with perfection? Answer me that, those who believe cults of nonsense that say God created everything perfect in 6 days and we're the ones that screwed it up. This is as stupid as these so-called gods of climate science that say, oh, well, everything would be perfect if people weren't weren't being so selfish and using their cars and blah, 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 using their gas stoves and stuff. And you just stop doing that so we can have perfection. Nonsense. Absolute nonsense. Okay. Then we have the Eastern system of the chakras, which conceives of a path of enlightenment, if you will, that involves the spine alone. And the rest of the body is kind of considered peripheral to it. And it presumes that our nature comes from these lowest to highest levels on the spine. And generally those correspond to lower desires and emotions to the highest desires and emotions. And you can see that they do have a sense that the crown chakra is actually outside the body. The third eye is the brain chakra, the brain center chakra, and the crown chakra is actually outside the body. At least the way that most people believe. Sometimes they think, well, the crown chakra is the brain and the third eye is something else. Okay, there is truth in here, but it's also a half-truth, a partial truth, not the full story. It doesn't explain everything. In particular, it's very, very much lacking in a definition of what a good Merkaba is versus what a bad Merkaba is. They try to define it as in, well, okay, you need to not act on these lower emotions and focus on the higher things. Well, there's some truth in that. You can't ignore the fact that you have a need to reproduce. You have a need to eat. Your feet won't function. You won't be able to move around and do anything unless you pay attention to the root. You won't be able to reproduce unless you pay some attention to the sacral. And it's important as a soul incarnated in human form to be successful not only as a soul, but as a soul incarnated as a human being. Otherwise, there would be no point of incarnation. And this is a dark nonsense that many people believe, that this whole incarnation stuff is just a waste of time, that we got to try to escape because we're not doing anything here and it doesn't matter and blah, blah, blah. A very dark, nihilistic way of viewing incarnation. So this is not the solution. In the postmodernist era, folks like M.C. Escher, the drawer of this interesting painting or engraving, got the idea that Merkaba was something that basically holds us in like a bunch of lizards or rats in a cage, rats or bats in a cage, and maybe took us in many different forms and so forth. Kind of a dark view of the Merkaba, but actually a partial truth. It is, to some extent, a limiter of what we can do, of the power we can exert as a spiritual entity. Spiritual entity being an entity of consciousness, of thought, not the physical body we're in any one time. This is a projection, not only in the physical universe, but in spiritual universes. All that we observe is a projection of what can't be seen. That is this Merkaba thing that everybody's been trying to figure out. Now, the best representation I can tell you about is an extension of this one. Okay, this is actually based on a pretty good idea. If you think of it as one tetrahedron, 4 of the vertices representing physical incarnation, which it does very well because we know in physical incarnation we have 4 dimensions to deal with. The 3 dimensions of space and the 1 dimension of time. This second one you can think of as incarnation in spiritual forms. Another set of 4 dimensions that represents what you can see when you have advanced in consciousness to be able to become aware of the spiritual dimensions. What's missing is there's a third tetrahedron that was not seen, was not understood, did not know it was existing because people didn't want to admit that they could become gods. Now, before we go there, let's talk about this as well. How many vertices are there in the 3-dimensional view of this? It's 8 actually. So in the more advanced metaphysics, based upon this representation, which is the more of a Hebraic or mystical Islamic view of the existence of the soul, it's got 8. So it actually has more dimensions than the Eastern chakra system. It's closer to the truth. The reason that there's all these other systems is that they were an evolving truth. Creation started out without any chakra system, and with one soul trying to figure out a government for souls. With each step of advancement of consciousness, came the opportunity to advance to a new level. Okay? And so different religions, different sects of religions have a different understanding of how far you can go as a soul based upon the restrictions and the limitations and the dogma of those religions. The Eastern religions think, you got, okay, if this is first level, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh heaven. This is where you get the worship of 7 as a perfect number, which a lot of societies have. 8 actually in this Christian, or I call this an Abrahamic faith mysticism. 8 was the highest you could do. 8 actually is a pretty dangerous level. It's an unstable level. And that's what got so many hooked in on 7. The 7th heaven idea is folks that knew about this 8th level of consciousness and the many times that humanity had tried to develop a Messiah better than an 8th level Messiah, brought catastrophe, brought great resets. There was great fear around that. It was that attempt to produce an 8th level Messiah which led to the last big flood, the Upper Dryas extinction event that destroyed almost all large species and left humanity starting over from some isolated pockets that were left when virtually all of the major civilizations that were extant at the time were covered by 100, 200, even 300 meters of water for a relatively enough time to completely destroy them, and some are still submerged. It was also a time of great tectonic and earthquake events because of these other things going on. These things go together. Okay, so what I'm telling you is that there's now actually 12 levels to this system, and that's essentially all the levels we need for all intents and purposes, because after 12, everything after that is just an address box, a drop box, identifying you as one of many who have achieved full godhood in the final approved system of reincarnation and karma. There will be minor rule tweaks after this, but there's nothing more to change here. It works, it's been proven, and until somebody comes up with a 16 level system that is superior to this one, and you come up with maybe some super god dimension, maybe that's the dimension of those who have their own multiverse. I don't know, that's another possibility. But right now, 12 dimensions is all you need to work with. Now this perfect view of it is not the way things work. Your Merkaba is constantly shifting and changing and can actually take on different forms in its infancy. So that, it's not a perfect tetrahedron. You start out with a physical Merkaba that's based upon basically how far you've stretched your experience of physical incarnations. So if you're a newborn soul and you had one lifetime, even if it was the lifetime of, a really influential soul like Hitler or something like that, or Napoleon, you would have a very, very limited Merkaba that would have a certain shape that was not very regular, not well formed like this, not fully developed. Let me move to another place on the internet to kind of show you what I mean. Now this is another thing that feeds into some of the confusion that folks have about spirituality. These ideas, let me move this out of the way so we can see more of that. This led to the idea, okay, there may be platonic solids, there may be perfect shapes that are better than the tetrahedron. And this is another direction that folks headed, trying to define, well, what is the perfect soul? It's a very materialistic way of viewing the soul. And basically Platonism is a very materialist philosophy. It doesn't have all the answers. Any of the Neoplatonists are basically trying to shape spirituality as being a pure physical thing, and it's all about here and now, and they don't really believe in any afterlife, or at least not any until Jesus comes and waves his magic wand and says, now you get to all be risen. There's a little truth in everything, so take everything with a grain of salt. All right, so the idea of Platonic solids is having Merkabas that take different cubic forms, regular cubic forms, and those are supposedly the perfect soul. This is where crystal worship comes from. And there is truth in that. Crystals do have oscillations, they have magic frequencies, and if you find you're able to work with magic frequencies of crystals, that is your secret power, if you will. This is not power given by God. This is power given by, I suppose, the Platonic God, who is not the God, but has their own worshipers. And I've told you about how the multiverse works. Let's go back to my main let's see, let's go to seventh day of creation, since we're still in it. So you got a whole bunch, so you got a whole bunch of training or experimental universes, heavens and hells. There is one here that represents Platonic heaven, the crystal god heaven, if you will. Maybe a bunch of them that have slightly different beliefs. They have, as I've told you, the ability to anoint souls as representatives of that universe, that God or ideal. But that is not being anointed by the God, the first creator, the one who started the whole universe idea. Nor is it being anointed by any of the key souls that run this creation engine. You can be anointed by the crystal Platonic God, and maybe also be anointed then subsequently by Lucifer, and become a dark worshiper of power through acquisition. You could then be anointed by Lilith and become a pursuer of power through lies, deception, trickery, taking advantage of others. Or you might become anointed by karma for being, a good soul that cares about what's going to happen to them in the next life, that has an awareness that what they do has consequences. And those consequences, even if they aren't faced in this life, will be faced in planning the next life. Still doesn't mean that they're anointed by God. You gotta attract a lot of attention to get God's attention. Okay, so how did that happen? How did this all work in the case of Joan of Arc? And let me get back to the topic here. So what was going on with this story of Joan? Okay, now I know this story pretty well, so I'm going to go through it, but I'm going to tell you it from a standpoint of an omnist viewpoint, from the standpoint of the way I explain creation, which is different than anybody else's creation story. And I don't want to hear, well, it doesn't say that in the Bible, or it doesn't say that in the Vedas, or it doesn't say that here. It doesn't. You sound silly making statements like that. If you're contending that people thousands of years ago knew more than we do today, could express it better in the language of the day, with the science of the day, than somebody who is up to date in spirituality and science and language and has been anointed pretty heavily, as it might turn out. I mean, you have no business even watching this. Just go back to your dogma and chill out, because you're not going to get anything I'm talking about. You're so stuck in the past, so stuck in a eyes wide shut tunnel vision, you're not going to listen to a word I have to say. For those of you who are open-minded, who want to learn, who want to grow, who may be a Catholic or Christian or Orthodox or Muslim of any sect, a Sufist, Hindu, any of those sects, a Buddhist, any of those sects, listen to me and see if you learn something from this. Okay, so background. In about the mid-1300s, England and France had been locked in a struggle that later came to be known as the 100 Years' War. Arguably, it was one of the longest conflicts of human history, recorded history. And it was very violent. It was mostly fought, in fact, almost completely fought in France. Although there were a number of French attempts to invade England as part of it. And animosity from this war still exists today. At the point that Joan was born, the English were winning. They had been having many successes under Edward III's, Edward III's son, called the Black Prince. His name was Edward II, but he never actually became king, so he's not the same as Edward IV. They call him the Black Prince. And he was an excellent war leader, and probably had come from a line that was anointed by the spirit of Saint Michael, who was a warrior for the Lord. His family, by medieval standards, were pretty good guys. They ruled well, they ruled hard, tough love, but they took care of their people for the most part. Again, this is a different age, so I don't want to hear people say, whoa. In general, that was the leaders of England were better than the leaders of France, and that's why they were becoming so successful in this war. Now, that war actually goes back quite a bit further to basically the conquest of England by a French lord. The Norman invasion. Normandy was a province of France. The Duke of Normandy, William the Conqueror, conquered England. So the English kind of viewed this war as getting revenge for the conquest, and that's how their leaders sold it propagandistically. Well, look, we're going to get revenge for all those horrible Frenchmen coming and sticking their boot on you. Especially, that was a really popular narrative among the best foot soldiers, which were the archers, the English archers, who were a huge factor in the success of the English. At any rate, at the time that Joan was born, the last major stronghold of the royalists, the French royalist party, was Orleans, one of the, at the time, maybe even a more important city than Paris, the capital of that French kingdom. And it was under siege and it was about to fall. And the story goes that Joan began hearing voices, actually well before the siege started, about she had a special mission or something like that. And God had reserved her for something special. Now let's talk about how that happened from the standpoint of souls. Joan was born to a what I would call, actually for the time, middle class family. Her family was not serfs; they weren't slaves to the land. They were independent property owners, and in their village, they were among kind of the leaders of their village that kind of organized things and supervised a lot of the activities that were going on in that village so that their lord wouldn't have to look closely at it. They were kind of like middle management as well. So her family was not poor, as some people would have you believe. They were middle class. She didn't get any education because they didn't educate girls at that time. In that class, they didn't even educate boys except for teaching them how to cipher if they thought they were going to be good at commerce, teaching them how to fight if they thought they might have a chance of succeeding as soldiers, or maybe if they seemed to show some promise in the church services and stuff like that, of being able to memorize particular passages of the Mass or the Bible, they would, approach a priest or a abbot or whatever and suggest, my son might be well suited to be in your organization and become a scribe or a priest. This is the way the meritocracy worked then. And contrary to what many people believe, it actually worked pretty well. Unless you were on the very bottom strata of society where everybody kind of treated you like an untouchable. And anyone who knows the caste system in India knows that we have not created a perfect meritocracy anywhere in the world as yet. There are still untouchables in almost every culture. And in fact, most cultures, most countries make a point of defining new untouchable classes to give everybody somebody that they can hate, somebody they can badmouth, somebody they can put down with impunity. And well, in the country I come from, the new untouchable are guys like me, an older white guy who won't stop speaking their mind in terms of politics and religion. They hate us like they want to stomp us out like cockroaches. That's what's going on in the U.S. That's why I don't live there anymore. I live in Indonesia, where I'm just kind of a strange bug that nobody knows what to do with, and they just want to stay away from, mostly. Okay, so Joan was born in this. Her family, this is conjecture here because I don't have detailed information on her family, but I suspect her family was one of the ones that did their job pretty well. They were honest dealing with people. They were very community focused. They practiced the virtues that Jesus taught, that all good prophets, all good spiritual teachers would teach. Taking care of your neighbor, being there for them without expecting anything in return, being part of a healthy community. Okay? This is basic stuff, folks. Everybody agrees that that is good. And at the same time, balancing that against, you've got to take care of your own family. If you don't take care of your own family, if you don't take care of your own health, you're not going to have any energy, any spiritual energy left to help others. So it's a balancing act, a balance of power, which, as I teach, is what every aspect of human incarnation is about. It's not meant to be easy. It's meant to be a challenge to balance a lot of different priorities. That's how we learn about our Merkaba, what things we're good at, what things we aren't good at, what we can balance, what we can't balance, what we want to focus on, and what we can let slide. And there's no one answer. These folks that have been trying to say, oh, there's one perfect answer and you have to be exactly like this if you want to go to heaven, those are bad teachers. Those teachers do not know God. They do not know how creation works. They do not know how the multiverse works. The multiverse needs all kinds of souls to do all kinds of things in all kinds of environments. That's why it's a multiverse. If there's something that folks want to accomplish in the multiverse and there's no place for them to do it, and it seems to be something that serves a purpose that makes them better souls, there will eventually be a universe for that. It doesn't really cost anything because consciousness is unlimited. It can grow and grow and grow and be divided and divided and divided, and that's the nature of consciousness. The limitations come from the projection of consciousness and the interaction of consciousness within the multiverse at whatever local address they're talking about. Okay, so I'm pretty sure that her parents were anointed by Karma, or one of Karma's many clones. Okay, Karma's one of these special souls that when she anoints others, let's go back to this picture. Karma, like God, is a soul that existed outside of the physical universes and the spiritual universes before the beginning of the Big Bang. The Big Bang was a dual universe. One universe was led by Lucifer, the name I like to give to this soul. There was no names, there was no English at the time, not any language. This soul ruled by law, testing laws, testing new situations against existing laws, and making new laws. This is a god of law, who also gets called Allah in Islamic tradition. This is not God the Most High. This is God's most devoted child, who took on this role of the tester of laws. That's his thing, his bag. That's what he focuses on, has focused on since the beginning of time and space. Now there's another soul here that is spawned from Borg. Borg is the collector of bad ideas, bad laws, things that don't work. And Lilith, as the representative of Borg in the universes, she started out as the leader of this anti-universe, where antimatter prevailed, and none of the laws that came to affect matter and souls playing in this world were necessarily true here. You could do anything with a thought in Lilith's heaven, as long as you didn't displease Lilith. If you displease Lilith in any way, back to Borg you go for recycling. This is the most authoritarian kind of universe you could imagine. Lucifer plays by laws. He can't just kick anybody out of his universe. He can say, well, karma, I'm having a problem here. This soul's not obeying my laws and is interfering with my testing and interfering with an important piece of what I'm doing for God here. Can you help me get rid of them? And then that's when karma says, Lilith, I think you have a soul to come and snatch here. And Lilith gets to start acting on that soul until they do something so bad that they get kicked out and go to Borg for recycling. Okay, this is how we get rid of bad apples in the physical universe. Without taking away their free will, we move them to another universe where they can see what it's like to step on others' toes. Maybe not Lilith's universe. There are a lot of other universes and a lot of hells that you can be sent for remedial training as a soul. So that's effectively letting this Borg machine anoint. They will take anybody. They don't care how many sins you've committed. They don't care how bad your behavior is. The worse the better. That you're just a soul to them. You're just a source of spiritual energy. That's how the Lilithian Borg side of this equation works. They're not God's side. They are the adversary. Now you might think they have a lot of power. Actually, they don't, because these weak souls with bad ideas need a lot of care. They constantly have to be watched and tended and told what to do, what not to do. They cannot be automated very well except in Borg's care. Borg gives them fantasies, Matrix movie fantasies to live within, and then milks their spiritual energy to power everything that works on automation. And as scientists, materialist scientists would like to believe, there is a large fraction of the multiverse that works completely according to law, completely according to predetermined rules. What they don't comprehend is that's not true of everything. What does work under automation or AI is what's been proven and tested so well that no conscious soul generally wants to occupy that role. And so you get NPC souls from Borg to take on those roles. Those are sometimes newly created, sometimes they're old souls that nobody wants to play with anymore, and Borg decides, oh, we need a new soul for a grain of sand that's going to exist when this volcanic explosion finishes up, or when whatever this happens. Let's take one of these worthless souls and make it the grain of sand for the rest of eternity, or until something jars them out of that incarnation. Okay, Borg is definitely working with a lot of these numb souls that want to go to the nirvana. I want to be part of the one. I want to be assimilated. I want God to tell me everything to do and just live with no thoughts but whatever I want to think. This is this fantasy land thinking that you're heading for Borg. You're being anointed by a Lilithian entity, a hive mind, to think that whatever one they want you to be part of is God, is all there is. Just come to us. Bring us your tired, your poor, your stupid souls yearning to be whipped. Okay, that's what you get. Well, let's go back to the story then. So, there were a lot of these dumb souls around at that time, just like now. And this family wasn't of them. They were doing their best, doing what they could in a very dark time where villages were being ravaged every day by the English or by the French or even by free troops of roaming bandits and soldiers who had been kicked out of the core armies of the two sides and were just operating on their own. It was arguably the most lawless time that Europe has ever seen. At any rate, this nice, wonderful family had a good child, and that child lived in a very functional village. Maybe that whole village happened to have been anointed by some high spirit. Maybe the spirit of Saint Mary. Who knows? I don't know the details of that. You can dig into the ecclesiastical documents, into her testimony, and you can probably find out what her pattern of anointment was. The thing is that to get to new levels of spirituality, you have to attract anointment. In particular, to get past these major levels. Now, we need to go back and talk about this Merkabic view. So, you can advance in a physical idea of development in pretty much any direction you want to go without being anointed, just by being the child of parents who raise you with a certain background programming, and by either following that program or not following that program and doing something that makes you a unique individual that attracts the attention of another soul. And as I told you, this happens from birth. You get a fetus at about 3 to 6 months that is known to have a certain DNA soul, which is a combination of the properties of the soul of the father's DNA, and a combination of the properties of the mother's DNA. And because sex resulted from combination of Luciferian candidate and a Lilithian candidate, this was like a previous truce between God and the adversary, was the creation of sex. The Luciferian component was the male component. The Lilithian component was the female component. The hive mind component is the female component, and that is why females of our species have a very, very strong tendency to get assimilated into hives. They're much more community oriented. They want to bind into a community. They, in general, would prefer peace and stability over war, over freedom. They would give up their freedom in order for a little bit of peace. Generally, this is a more female attitude because it is based in the Borg attitude of submission to this oneness. Let somebody else decide. I'm just going to take care of my own little part of the world. Okay, that's Lilithian thinking, the female archetype. It's not bad necessarily if that one is actually doing something good for you, but as I've shown you, that one is not God. The original one is Borg, is this engine of creating stability through programming. This Orwellian entity that basically operates on the assumption that any soul I get to work with doesn't know what's good for them, and I'm going to repurpose them to whatever I need to do based upon whatever universe is calling for me for new souls to fill a hole. This is the way Borg works. Okay? If you like living in an Orwellian dystopia or utopia where some higher entity tells you what to do, when to do, how to do it, and you're just a little Pinocchio going through the program. Knock yourself out. That's where you're going to be after this lifetime is over. At any rate, this Joan started out, as all human children do, at a 0 level of consciousness. Now, all normal human children develop, at least under current laws, to a full comprehension of the 4 dimensions of time and space. Every child grows up with an understanding of how time works, basic understanding, and a basic understanding of how material laws work. They don't have full understanding. They don't know every little detail about physics. They don't know how every single thing is going to turn out, but they kind of have a fairly fleshed out idea when they reach adulthood of how this physical realm works. Only rarely does somebody develop any of this next realm of consciousness, the spiritual realm that starts at level 5. Okay, and this is where the whole 5th dimension thing, this is where the idea of the age of Aquarius comes, that humanity is about to level up such that we will all develop a basic first layer of spiritual understanding. Instead of just all getting to 4th level of a physical awareness, we're going to get to 5th level of a spiritual awareness. That's not anything like perfection. It's going to be challenging as hell, because this first level of spiritual awareness, the 5th dimension, is where you are most vulnerable to bored hive minds. When you open your 3rd eye, it's like turning on a radio set and not knowing how to set the frequency, and basically opening the souls around you to be able to set your frequency, to tune your radio to send you the messages they want. It makes you more susceptible to propaganda. It makes you more susceptible to manipulation and control. This is the challenge of the 5th layer of spirituality. Now, this anointment to spiritual awareness before now could only happen through the anointment by a soul that had already advanced beyond that level, that had a spiritual incarnation. Like the Archangel Michael, like previous saints. Any soul that had advanced to the point where they became aware enough of the spiritual level that they were invited to stay in some universe at the end of their incarnation and not be told, well, you know, I think you should go, oops, I gotta change that elsewhere. Let's actually go here. Yeah. So, you know, most of the time, these souls with only a lot of physical experience, they die, they go to one of these training universes, and they're offered by the guides who service them there, who aren't perfect. They're training to be spiritual guides. They're offered different incarnations, and they choose which one to take, and that sends them to a physical universe. Maybe the prime universe might be another physical universe. That's not the only one. They might be sent to incarnate in any of the same save games of the prime universe and actually go back in time and be working off of, I don't know, trying to become a better version of Joan of Arc. Playing that game again to see if they could play it better than Joan did, if that was their hero. And, you know, so this ties back to what I tell you about past lives. If you think that you had a heroic past life It may only be because you chose that as an avatar to incarnate as, to try to perfect their score, to try to learn something. This is how the game can work. This is why there's so many souls that, especially females right now, who think that they must be a reincarnation of Cleopatra. Or there's so many, ones out there think that they must have been Saint Michael or whoever, Nostradamus, whatever. Celebrity souls draw a lot of worshipers. And only the one that gets anointed by that celebrity soul is actually the one that is their chosen one. And again, remember I told you in the last few discussions that anointment happens because this spiritual soul is choosing another soul that might be their best version. Not will be, it's a candidate. If you are a soul that hasn't advanced fully to any spiritual level, you'll be choosing a candidate based on their DNA. That's all you really know. And you will be adding your soul to that DNA somewhere between the 3rd and 6th month and become the child of those parents. If no more conscious soul chooses that fetus, then it will get assigned a soul automatically by the source, the Borg, the NPC home. So Borg is not necessarily bad. The adversary is not bad. The adversary, though, is has no part in trying to better any soul. Its job is just to provide souls to fill roles. It's like the HR person that is just looking for a warm body. Okay, because Nick wants to make their job easy. That's what the adversary is all about. That's what Source is all about. If you have this idea that you want to return to Source, it's like an admission that you wasted this incarnation. You haven't accomplished anything. You're not going anywhere. You haven't learned anything. I just want to go home. Okay, you'll get your wish. But don't pretend that you're so enlightened and super spiritual and anything. You look really stupid to anybody that knows anything about how the whole thing really works. Okay, back to Joan of Arc. So, at the point that her Merkaba advanced, let's go back to the Merkaba view. At the point that she started becoming spiritually aware, that was the point at which she was anointed by her first spiritual soul. Now, this was not the Archangel Michael. This was just some other soul, maybe a soul that had been anointed by Michael at some point. Didn't succeed, but, kind of got an affinity with Saint Michael. It might have been a soul that was anointed by karma, might have been a soul anointed by whose family was anointed by the Mother Mary or whatever. Look at her history and you'll see her development as she became more aware spiritually. At that point, she started getting visions. She didn't have any powers. She thought those visions were crazy until the Archangel Michael began to speak to her. That's when she stepped up and drew the attention of one of the higher souls as an avatar for his replacement. That's what Joan of Arc was. That's why she had the power to inspire armies for a time. She was the avatar, the candidate of the Archangel Michael to replace him so that he could move on to his next level. And his next level was to be a full-fledged God, to have his own universe, his own choice of where he played, no longer bound to no longer bound to Lucifer's universe as a home base, but getting to return to God. And this was part of the plan of bringing the Messiah. As I told you, Michael, that soul, was the best version of Lucifer, God's favorite, who fought God's battle while God was away, learning and training and finding his replacement. And it all makes sense when you understand why Joan was chosen. Joan was chosen for a number of purposes. One was to bring an end to this horrible struggle between two people who were previous chosen people and who would be chosen people again in this grand scheme of humanity's apotheosis, of humanity's becoming a God-level species. These chosen people of France combined the blood of many different chosen peoples before. The French DNA has Celtic elements, Germanic elements, elements that came from Rome and Carthage because of its sea trade through the port of Marseille. Greek, very much a melting pot of DNA, which is basically how we tie together all the different chosen people, chosen species. And what has to happen for a new Messiah is to combine all the right pieces back together after kind of jumbling them up and throwing them all over, combine them in just the right vessel to attract an incarnation of these highest spirits and ultimately of God and Lucifer. Lucifer's replacement is going to take over the testing of this universe. So Lucifer can have a break, can stop being the being he is currently. That being is a being that I would describe as the high priest of the tall gray aliens. That's how Lucifer was dressed when I met him. The best version of Lucifer. Okay? The one that chose Joan as a potential replacement. Now, she didn't succeed as a replacement. She actually failed. She was a failed Messiah. What happened with Joan was, once Michael chose her, let's get back to her picture so you can be inspired by that. Once she started listening to Michael and chose her and she set off on her spiritual mission, she did what she was told. She followed Michael's direction. Now, Michael had been told, if you want to raise a successor, you've got to look for somebody that is a little different than you, because the feedback that God's been getting about what you've been doing since he picked you, and when I say God has been getting, you need to understand back here again, when God is incarnating in the physical world, he leaves a stand-in, an AI version to run his universe. That's the way it works. If you're physically incarnating, you've got to have some program to run everything. That program is not a soul that you get from Borg. necessarily. It might be if you're the people of your universe say, we don't like you, we don't want you to be a god anymore, we depose you, and they add all their spiritual energy together, they can kick you out and force you to be replaced by whatever soul their energy attracts as your replacement. That's how, in the spiritual realm, that's basically how we impeach spiritual officials. There is an impeachment process. It requires the combined spiritual energy of the people in that God's universe to say, you're not our God anymore, get out of here. And then a replacement is sworn in and will rule in God's stead, or Karma's stead, or Lucifer's stead, whatever universe you're talking about, until the real owner of that universe, the original creator of it, proves that they're better than the replacement. And so this is the anointment process. You can be anointed by any spiritual soul. But the meaning of that anointment can be good or bad, can be for better or worse, or neutral. Being anointed by Michael as Joan of Arc was kind of an indifferent thing, because what Michael was after is balance, atoning for all the dark things he had to do to protect this little experiment, this human species, from destruction by the adversary for long enough for it to develop into a god-level species. And to do that, it would have to train a new version of God. So the direction that Michael got was, okay, you've got to show that you can not only be a great war leader, but you can bring about the joining of two chosen species that have fallen, become corrupt, and raise them to a new level. A new level that will drive this plan to completion. And the plan always was to replace violent warfare with cultural competition, the competition of ideas, the competition of different conceptions of what is beautiful, what is functional, what will work, both artistically and scientifically. That's the way a perfect creation would work. Not being perfect, not, oh, everything's done, I'm off to the golf course for day 7. The idiocy of the way a lot of people read the Bible. No, a perfect creation is one where the game stays fun and challenging and interesting for everybody. And any soul that doesn't play the game well becomes a pain in the ass to everybody else playing around them, can be shuttled off to a padded cell universe where they can play with toy soldiers that they can't really hurt for as long as they want, and just stay out of everybody's way if they can't play nicely. Okay, so that was part of his goal, and that he did. He was also told he had to do it in a karmically positive way. So instead of whispering and saying, oh, do this, I'm going to give you this, I'm going to give you that, I'll make you powerful, I will give you riches and so forth, he told her the honest truth. That's why he's God's favorite version of Lucifer. He told her the truth. You're probably going to be persecuted, you're going to die, but this is an important thing to do for God and for your beloved country, France. And if those loyalties are important to you, then this is what you need to do. You need to go talk to the Dauphin, the crown prince, who's kind of a lousy character, laying around in Paris, gambling with his buddies and fooling around with whores and stuff like that, and convince him that he's got to raise an army and lift the siege of Orleans and become crowned king in his father's stead. His father was mentally incapacitated, wasn't really acting as a king, and was sort of being ruled by regency. Many of these lords in the regency were quite noble. The Duke of Orleans was one of them. That's why his city was under siege, because he was one of the few French patriots still holding out against the English. The Burgundians had totally turned rats and were actively serving with the British, or serving with the English, and helping them in the siege of Orleans. At any rate, this was her goal, and she was told, there's going to be bad stuff, and you're going to be punished and stuff like that. And what happened after she did relieve the siege of Orleans wasn't easy. She was wounded in the process. She didn't succeed right away. She had to have faith. She had to prove that she was worthy. And she had dark nights of the soul there where she questioned her decision, and where other spirits came to her and tried to convince her that she should not listen to her Archangel Michael. Maybe it wasn't his voice. Maybe you just imagined that. Anyway, she stuck to her guns. The siege was lifted, and shortly thereafter, the Dauphin was crowned King of France. And sadly, immediately after, when Joan said, okay, now let's go free the rest of France, because she thought, well, okay, if that was my mission, then certainly the mission of the guy that I just got crowned should be to go unite the kingdom and win the war, right? Exactly the opposite. He actually sort of made lip service to continuing Joan's crusade to liberate more castles and reconquer more territory from the English and the Burgundians, but in fact made a deal with the Burgundians to sell her out. And she was captured, laying siege to a Burgundian castle, and after basically most of her soldiers abandoned her on purpose in pay of the faithless master, and was captured by the Burgundians and eventually sold to the English, who put her on trial again. She'd been on a trial by the clergy of France, who were obviously very biased towards France and decided that her visions were from God. Nope, she'd had nothing to do with God at this point. Her visions, her mission was from Michael, not God. So she was captured and put on trial again, and the British clergy, all anointed by cardinals or bishops or popes, declared that she was a demon, a witch, a sorceress, and condemned her to death and burnt her at the stake, all in the name of the same God. Years and years later, much later, only after this animosity was a faded memory, was the esteem in which this girl was held pointed out as, maybe we should make this Joan of Arc a saint. Was that an act of God? Not at all. It was a political act. It was a political act which took place because this was an era where, when Joan was canonized by the Catholic Church, when they wanted to play up to the audience that they were losing. The female audience was being lost. They were the ones that were most succumbing to what the Catholics saw as an adversarial attack on their church. Many activist females in the church were in the Catholic Church were big early leaders of basically militant feminism and communism as being what the true church should be all about. Now, this is what happened with Joan. She became a saint not because of what she did during her lifetime, not because of being canonized, but because of her true story being recognized and how it served a bigger purpose. The successor of the Archangel Michael became the archetype of the female, and this is what grew out of it. His successor, as a woman, started a series of incarnations of Michael among women again. This is why the name Michel is so popular. In fact, in French, you can't tell the difference between the male and female versions of the name. Michel, Michel, exactly pronounced the same. When I say Michel in France, they won't know if I'm talking about a male friend or a woman friend or a trans friend. It's a very unisex name and a very popular name that feeds into a lot of what's going on now. Healing the battle of the sexes. Not so much healing it as it had to become actually a major factor in bringing about the return of the Messiah. But this was a step in it, and the sainting of Joan of Arc was a huge step toward that, and it created basically two sorts of souls molded in Joan's image, who were anointed by God. There was a woman, I don't know who she was, but who became the female Michael's favorite, who represented what he felt after experiencing femininity, experiencing the body of a woman. What he felt was the epitome of a fighting woman, a woman with fighting spirit, who would fight for God, would fight for right. Not because she was a woman, not because she was entitled, but because women have special gifts, special talents. They're gifted with a woman's body. They're gifted with the legacy of descent through the female and through the male. And the best of women display more of what is godly and karmic in their nature. Add to that the specialty of Archangel Michael as the Lord's favorite warrior child, the tester that will go to battle for what's right. That's the good feminist. Okay? That's the positive feminist who's not defending women against all men, but who is standing up for what is right against all evil. And will even go to battle, will even sacrifice herself for good. This is what a real divine feminine is all about. It's not being the goddess of love and loving everybody and treating everybody as their equal and supporting everybody's narcissistic fantasies. That is not the divine feminine. That is actually the opposite. There's a dark version of this incarnation of Lucifer in female form that happened after Joan of Arc, after this special soul became the Archangel Michael's successor. As I told you, whenever we choose a successor, that soul gets tested, and they have to go through reincarnation and karma, and they have to earn their godhood so they can replace another god. Now, Archangel Michael was a god in the old system of reincarnation and karma, was a god that had only been to the highest level that had been achieved before. No soul had made it to the 12th level, Merkaba level, had fully fulfilled this dream of 4 complete dimensions in physical, spiritual, and God realm. Who was the first to do that? Karma, because it's her system. She was the first one to say, hey, I think I found the final solution, a way that we can all be better gods than we were. And we've been testing her idea, this new idea of the 12th level that finishes out this whole Merkaba system. And God is one of the last ones to pass this test. He's kind of a slow learner. That's why all the prophecies have him being almost the last one. Except for the Archangel Michael, who had even a harder time to learn because his identity had been so wrapped up in the male act of violence, war. And it took God fully awakening to then anoint, in turn, a better version of Michael, of Lucifer, the good Lucifer, God's favorite Lucifer, and karma to anoint one, and Lucifer to anoint one. There's a version of Lucifer that pleases Lucifer the most and is going to take his position as the great tester of the physical universe. The version that karma picks is going to be the defender of karma's laws. If a soul doesn't want to go to the universe that they've been told to go to, that version of Saint Michael, that version of Lucifer, that version of this second soul of all creation, will go grab those souls and forcibly take them to the universe that they've been assigned to, willy-nilly. This is how exorcism happens. This is what's happening when a priest does a real exorcism. They are taking some spirit that absolutely refuses to let go of whatever they've attached themselves to in the physical world and throwing them out of it. This is what exorcism really is, and it does involve demons, but it involves actually the better version of Lucifer as well. The one that gives the power of exorcism is an incarnation of the Saint Michael variety, of that line, that powerful line. This is why it's a dangerous thing to be an exorcist, because you have a lot of power and it can be misused and it can be turned. And by aligning your energies with the power to exercise, you are aligning your energy with a Luciferian energy, not with God's energy. And you are subject to temptation yourself. Now, the version of Saint Michael that gets anointed by God is the one that fulfills a special prophecy. A prophecy that is the not understood prophecy in Daniel that basically says that first the Messiah will come, and then Saint Michael will come to the earth for a short time before the finish of the event, and the dead shall be raised, the last trumpet, etc., etc. Okay, that version that is chosen, is anointed by God, is anointed in a very special way. Anointed in the pattern of Messiah. Anointed as God's replacement in this universe. Not to be a warrior, but to be a messenger, a leader of all kinds. That's what God has been up to this point. God's replacement is going to need to be a very versatile leader, just like God was. And that's who the new Messiah is. God's replacement, selected according to this very strange system where you got to get just the right DNA together, and it's got to be anointed by the Spirit of God. The embodied Spirit of God, not just any old anointment by God, because God can touch any spirit spiritually, but you're only being touched by the version of God that is his replacement. If you feel the Spirit of God, you're feeling the spirit of his stand-in, who's waiting for God to wake up to a better version. To be truly anointed by God, you have to be anointed by the Messiah, as the new Messiah, passing the baton, which is why I tell you about the pattern of the dread pirate Roberts, the pattern of the Gemini twins. This is an important pattern in all creation. And that's why there's two males. It's always a male-to-male passing of the baton, because the female line is the line of Lilith. It contains the seed of Borg, the seed of the adversary. I'm not trying to insult females. This is just the truth of sex. That's the one fundamental difference between every female of every species and every male of every species, is it all goes back to that combination of a Luciferian DNA with a Lilithian DNA. Okay, so what has to happen? You've got to have a child. born of two parents who have all of the blood of all of the Luciferian and Lilithian lines, who has also been anointed on both sides by karma, come together and produce children that, for whatever reasons, attracted the interest of karma again. Whoa! There's a set of people come together that could potentially make a child that I think would be a good replacement for God. Might finally prove that my new system works. This new system of karma works, and we can finally wake up God from the sleep of reincarnation amnesia. That's who the real Joseph and Mary are. That's the truth of that prophecy. There was no physical Jesus. It was a story, it was a prophecy. I'm sorry if I'm offending anybody with that truth, but this is the truth of the matter. This was a story that it was so cool that it was taken up by the elite of every group in that area. And it became the legends of that turned into sort of the Judaic version of future messianic tradition. It turned into the Roman Empire Messiah tradition. And in fact, the family of the Emperor Vespasian, the ones that conquered and destroyed Jerusalem, were a Messiah family. Not the Messiah, but a Messiah family, a generation of people that would actually be the nucleus of the Catholic Church. The first Pope that we can verify existed was Pope Clement I.